Worlds has officially kicked off and we've got some of the most stacked play-ins we've seen in a while. In this analysis, we'll be taking a look at North America's very own evil geniuses squaring off against EU's Fnatic. The meta's still getting figured out, but this video aims to be a great first look into what teams are prioritizing and how things change from day to day. Let's hop into the draft. If you enjoyed this analysis, would love a sub for more content like this. Jumping into the initial bans, Fnatic banned on Hecarim, Akali, and Ornn, whereas EG banned on Sejuani, Yuumi, and Kalista. EG's bans are focused on removing some of the most flexible picks possible from Fnatic, shown in Kalista and Sejuani. Yuumi is also similar in this vein, but in my opinion, this is probably not that necessary of a ban in this upcoming Worlds meta. Fnatic's ban are a myriad of picks that are likely meant to open up their options for their draft plan and create as many viable openers for them as possible. Out of the bans, Fnatic actually prioritized the Aatrox as their first pick. I've been seeing some varying priorities on the early picks for differing teams now, so this is likely the first of a series of different possible openers for different teams right now. Aatrox is a champion that has been relatively unscathed in the current meta due to all the changes, and still has a pretty decent matchup spread overall. His worst matchups in champions like Aurelia are somewhat more viable, as are forward comps in general right now, so that would be something small to keep in mind. It's relatively easy to hedge your picks on the blue side to prevent the enemy from drafting backline dive comps, however. What I think is interesting though is the fact that Fnatic are okay with giving up the Caitlyn here, which EG subsequently take in R1, R2. They also follow up with the Sylas blind pick. Sylas has been a champion that's been coming up more and more in the current meta. He's not as flexible as, let's say, a control mage, but he's received a lot of buffs that's been pushing him up in priority. In response, Fnatic go for the Graves, which seems to basically be the jungler that's been cutting above everyone else. Right now, almost every other good jungler in the game has gotten nerfed, and I can say that overall, there aren't that many strong picks in the jungle. Farm junglers are likely not very strong right now, and facilitator jungles, while filling in the primary need for most teams in the form of CC, are also pretty weak stat-wise overall. Graves sort of strikes a happy medium similar to his place in Worlds 2020, where he has good matchups into all of these champions, so Fnatic go for the take here. They also take their best matchup possible into the Sylas with Victor, which I think is pretty decent because it doesn't reveal much and it fares well into the Sylas in lane. If it were up to me, I also believe that Misfortune probably should have been picked up in the B2, B3 slot instead of Victor, and I'll explain why in a bit. For R3, EG must lock in the best pairing with the Caitlyn right now if they don't want to risk getting those pairings banned out in phase 2, so they simply take the Lux and we move to phase 2. At this point, EG's draft will be very focused around the Caitlyn pick, so they need to ban out bottom lanes that disrupt that. On the marksman side, both Misfortune and Jhin provide the worst matchups possible in terms of kill threat, whereas things like Ezreal Karma can also minimize the matchup advantage from Caitlyn and provide a strong poke win condition playing outside her range. On the support side, it would just be things like Nautilus and to a lesser extent Leona that can give her problems. The bans are Fuck This and EG remove Karma and Nautilus. Fnatic on the other hand remove two facilitator junglers from EG in this case because based on the 3 picks that EG has, they pretty much must pick one in order to round out their comp properly. Alternatively, Fnatic could also ban out potentially bad top matchups, which can be great for Aatrox. But since Caitlyn and Lux has been picked, traditionally bad matchups for Aatrox like Camille Fiora are not as viable because they also play forward in lane and require resources, opposite to what Caitlyn Lux wants to play. Caitlyn lanes also require a ton of resources because Caitlyn needs room to be able to stretch her legs. Therefore, bans for top are not as necessary in this case, as junglers cannot path to both sides of the map, and this justifies the Jarvan and Lee Sin bans. If there's room for improvement at this point, it's possible that EG should have opted for an Aatrox ban in first phase instead of Yuumi. This is because in phase 2, they can actually ban Misfortune instead of Nautilus in this case, and this effectively forces Fnatic to draft Jhin as the only remaining playable matchup into Kate. The Aatrox ban is necessary in this case as well, because once you force Fnatic to go Jhin on B4, B5 here, you then just draft tankier picks on R4, R5 so that the Jhin cannot deal damage against your team, and then the draft overall is just in EG's favor. Just for clarity, forward picks are very hard to pick against Caitlyn lanes as well because of all of these champions having very severe range disadvantages against Caitlyn as well. Something like Kai'Sa, Samira, even Tristana is not that great. If the ban's played out like this, it puts the cards into EG's favor in general and just gives more options for a wand draft. Instead, the draft plays out like this. EG R4 their facilitator jungler that's still available and opt for Viego, then Fnatic automatically take MF Leona in this case, and the matchup for bot lane is actually pretty salvageable. Caitlyn still has priority, but fights overall can still be very favored for Fnatic in this case if the MF lane can secure 1 kill. I'm not sure if this was the intent, but this is the benefit of having Aatrox in the B1 slot, and it's crazy to think it actually trickled down and all the way to the rest of the draft. The Aatrox pick hedges against tanky picks because it matches very well into them and is actually bit back EG in the end. Let's say for example, Misfortune was banned in second phase and Aatrox was banned in first phase, then the Jhin pick condition actually ends up working out. But because that wasn't banned and Fnatic ended up B1ing it, then this is why the draft ended up playing out like this, and then it gave much fewer options for EG to play with. The R5 comes out and EG have to pick a good matchup in the Aatrox now while functioning on low resources since they have Caitlyn. It's hard for them to pick tanks and they can't pick things with resources, so it ends up being Renekton. which is okay, but considering this is an R5 pick against a B1 Aatrox, it's actually pretty sad to see that they couldn't take better advantage of it, and it's not really that great of a matchup overall. Overall, EG's draft is characterized by the early game options that it has as potential domination through the Caitlyn lanes, but Fnatic has room to play and excellent team fighting to capitalize on any mistakes that EG make very hard. With this draft, there is a very thin margin for EG to perform, and the moment they make a mistake, the game is pretty much over. They had a good opportunity to capitalize with the Caitlyn pick, but they did not cover all of the bases required to draft for it, and this reflected in the draft and the game itself. Due to the ease of execution and their ability to minimize the Caitlyn pick, which is EG's biggest strength in this draft, I rate this draft 65-35 for Fnatic. As always though, hopefully this draft was insightful to you guys, and I will catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.